programme motion to be moved formally?
Formally.
The question is, as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Water Special Measures Bill, Lords, consideration of Lord's message.
No.
Before we move to consideration of the Lord's message, I can confirm that nothing in the Lord's message engages Commons financial privilege. We will begin with the government motion to insist on Commons Amendment 1, disagree to Lord's Amendment 1B, and to propose amendments A and B in lieu of the words left out by the Commons Amendment 1, with which we will consider the other government motion as listed on the selection paper. I call the Minister to move the motion. Emma Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm delighted to have another opportunity to debate this transformative bill in this chamber. And I would like to thank all honourable members for continuing to take an interest in this important piece of legislation, demonstrating our shared commitment to improve the water sector. Today, this House will be taking into consideration amendments made in the other place. I recognise there is huge interest across this House on wider issues relating to water, and though our debate today is solely focused on the changes made to the Water Special Measures Bill in the other place during their consideration of Commons amendments on the 5th of February, I look forward to future opportunities to discuss wider concerns and actions, for example, through work relating to the Independent Commission. Turning first to the changes made in the other place, which would require water companies to regularly report to Ofwat on their financial structures and ensure this information could be readily accessed and understood by the public. It is important to highlight that water companies are already required under their licences to publish, by a set date, financial performance metrics within their annual performance reports. These metrics include interest on their borrowings, financial flows, and an analysis of their debt. If water companies do not comply with these licence conditions, Ofwat can take enforcement action, including issuing fines. However, the government recognises that there is an opportunity to make financial data more accessible for members of the public. The government has therefore worked at pace with Lord Cromwell and Ofwat to develop a way to achieve our shared objective of improving the transparency and accessibility of reporting on key financial metrics. This will see the insertion of a new Section 35E into the Water Industry Act 1991, which will make clear that water companies should provide an intelligible overview of their financial position at least once a year. This overview should include a summary of the significant changes that have taken place over the last 12 months and will cover key aspects of water companies' financial positions, such as share capital and levels of debt. This information... Yes?
I'm very grateful to it. Ofwat has said that it believes that the right level of debt to the MP should be 60%. And yet it has taken no action against those companies where the level of debt has risen as much as 80%. Can the Minister assure us that in the provisions of this bill, Ofwat will not only have the power, but use it against those companies whose debt levels are too high?
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd also like to note that how much I know my honourable friend cares about this issue and many environmental issues. This particular amendment just refers to the reporting arrangements for levels of debt rather than specifying the amount of levels of debt that would be acceptable. This is about increased transparency. However, I think where the points my honourable friend's making fall more into the remit of the Water Commission, which is looking at all of these issues as part of its wider work on the Commission. However, just to stress, this particular amendment is just about how that information is reported and transparency. So this information must be made available in a prominent place in the water company's website, ensuring accessibility for members of the public. Subsection 4 of new section 35E also provides Ofwat with the power to determine the information that a water company must publish, as well as the ability to review requirements on financial reporting from time to time. This addition will ensure reporting requirements keep pace with changes in the expectations and needs of bill payers. I would like to be clear, however, that the Government expects this power to be used to ensure reporting requirements remain relevant rather than to dilute or diminish the ambition of reporting requirements. Financial reporting will also continue to be underpinned by the pre-existing statutory obligations and licence conditions. In line with other requirements brought forward in Clause 1, this new requirement will commence at royal assent. These amendments will help rebuild public trust in the sector and provide the public with the levels of openness and transparency they deserve. Moving now to the other amendment tabled by the Government today, which relates to the requirement for Ofwat's rules to be confirmed by way of affirmative statutory instrument, as reintroduced by the motion tabled by Lord Blencathra in the other place. While the Government recognises there are calls in the other place for increased parliamentary oversight of Ofwat's rules, we have significant concerns that a requirement for Ofwat's rules to be finalised through an affirmatory statutory instrument would delay these rules being implemented. The Government is clear that Ofwat's rules should be brought forward as soon as possible. This will ensure swift and meaningful improvements in the performance and culture of water companies as they begin to deliver on the largest investment package in the history of the water sector. Requiring the rules to be confirmed by statutory instrument would risk delay to the rules coming into force. We also maintain concerns that the changes made in the other place would compromise the independence of Ofwat because they would require Ofwat's rules to be confirmed through legislation prepared by government. This independence must be protected if we are to ensure investor confidence in the water sector. The Government is confident that the bill already provides for sufficient scrutiny of Ofwat's rules, as Ofwat is required to conduct a statutory consultation on the rules before they are finalised. Separately, Ofwat have already concluded an initial policy consultation on a draft of the rules and how they will apply, and Ofwat received 11,700 responses on the rules through their consultation, which they are actively considering. As such, the Government is seeking to reverse this requirement and, in its place, is seeking to introduce provisions which will require Ofwat to provide its first set of rules in draft to the Secretary of State at least 7 days before they are issued. I hope members across the House will support this change, which will ensure Ofwat's rules are put into place as soon as possible following royal assent, in addition to the Government's amendments to introduce new financial reporting requirements. I beg to move.
The question is that this House insists on Commons Amendment 1, disagrees to Lord's Amendment 1B and proposes Amendments A and B in lieu of the words left out by Commons Amendment 1. Dr Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a great pleasure to be speaking in this final stage of this bill. Before I start, I would respond to my honourable friend, the member for Brent, my former colleague on the EFRA Select Committee. His question is very pertinent in terms of the levels of borrowing that water companies can have, and the Minister is right that this particular amendment is to do with reporting rather than the levels of borrowing. It is regrettable that the Government chose to reject the Conservative amendment at committee stage, which would have allowed the Secretary of State to set the actual amounts of borrowing that water companies can have. So I hope moving forward into the Cunliffe review that the Government may look at this again so that we can have a tighter control on the water companies and their levels of debt. Madam Deputy Speaker, before I make my remarks on the Lord's messages today, I would just like to say that getting to this stage of this bill's passage has been the result of much hard work across this House and the other place, and I would like to thank everyone, both front of House and behind the scenes, who has worked hard to get us here, including the Minister for her willingness to listen to those across the House throughout the bill's passage, and similarly her counterpart in the other place, Baroness Hayman. Those who've worked to draft the bill and the amendments, the Bill Committee, the DEFRA and Parliamentary and staff, and campaign groups and stakeholders who have provided their insights to the committee to seek to help make this bill even stronger, not least the Conservative Environment Network, the Angling Trust and the Wildlife and Countryside Link. Sadly, however, this final stage of the bill risks yet being another missed opportunity to holistically act on this important issue, as we, the opposition, have stressed that the government risks doing through the bill's passage here in this House and indeed in the other place. It's unfortunate that the government have been unwilling to go much further than their copy and paste approach, rebooting the measures the Conservatives took in government to address this issue. We've heard in the previous stages about how the bans on bonuses for water company chief execs and ensuring 100% of storm overflows are monitored, up from 7% under Labour, have all been introduced by the previous Conservative government. Nonetheless, ever the optimist, I came today with the hope that the government may be willing to reconsider their position on the specific issues of the amendments and the reasoning that we've had from the other place, which cover very familiar ground as we've debated these issues in the previous stages, not only in this House but also in the other place. At the heart of the Lord's amendments is a theme we, His Majesty's most loyal opposition, have emphasised throughout the bill's passage: accountability. A lack of accountability for water companies in the past is what has created many of the issues the water industry has faced, and the Conservatives in government, and now this government, have attempted to try and address this. This is another chance for the government to go even further and do some of what is really needed to inject into its approach. Turning to Lord's disagreement with Commons Amendment 1, Madam Deputy Speaker, this reverses the decision of this government to remove measures in the bill that would require financial reporting to be collected by Ofwat for its remuneration guidance. We know that one of the most worrying aspects of our water industry has been its financial resilience, as Ofwat's Monitoring Financial Responsibility report back in November made clear, with 10 companies being at need of increased monitoring and 3 being in the highest category of risk, with closer monitoring being required at a more senior level with Ofwat. We all know, too, the cases of specific water companies and the very real risk financial mismanagement brings for the very survival of those companies and the water provision that their consumers are relying upon. It's disappointing, therefore, that throughout the passage of the bill, the government have been unwilling to accept Conservative amendments and, in the other place, crossbench amendments, such as this one by Lord Cromwell, offered in a constructive spirit that may have gone some way to address this issue. But nonetheless, we, the opposition, truly want to see better financial resilience, and so it is with this issue of financial reporting in particular we want the government to accept as a reasonable step to regain accountability on financial resilience. The Lord's additional adjustment to Clause 1 quite simply means that when it comes to financial reporting, there is nowhere to hide for water companies and the decisions that they make in this area. I note now that the government, in rejecting Commons Amendment 1, have tabled Government Amendment A to Lord's Amendment 1B to go some way to improving the financial transparency of water companies, and that they have offered this as a formal concession to Commons Amendment 1. I would just add here that subsection 4 of the government amendment suggests that deciding what water companies must publish should be decided, Madam Deputy Speaker, from time to time. I do hope that the Minister can see that the vagueness of that statement might be a problem moving forward, and in that time to time could allow the regulator not to review this when the need arises because they've done it a few years prior, or even longer, and justify it by arguing that they are doing that from time to time, as the law outlines. Even if it were the case that nothing or very little would need changing from year to year, or every few years even, surely it would be better to require this to be at least looked at precise, regular intervals, so that the most valuable information is being provided in the best possible format. That aside, however, we, His Majesty's most loyal opposition, acknowledge their concession in terms of financial transparency and indeed the way the public can access this, including characteristics of capital and debt, and are pleased to see this addition to the bill. In the same spirit, Madam Deputy Speaker, I move on to Lord's disagreement and reason 2A, which urges this House to consider again the matter of there being a requirement that any rules under Clause 1 be brought into force by means of a statutory instrument from the Secretary of State. Now, this amendment, again, is familiar territory, and we've debated this at many stages, having been a measure consistently called for by His Majesty's opposition in the other place, and indeed in this House, both in the Chamber and in Bill Committee. As we, the opposition, have maintained throughout, Accountability is needed to deliver and enforce change in the water industry. But that must also include the government of the day, no matter which party they represent. It's odd on one hand that this government has claimed that they want to have a tight grip on water companies, but has consistently sought to oppose a measure that would allow them to do exactly that. It's odd too, by the way, that at committee stage the third party sought to amend the same part of the bill that would have had the same effect. While I note their intentions were to seek to bring in guidance as soon as possible, there is a distinction between intent and effect, and removing some of the same lines would have had the same exact effect in ridding the bill of the statutory instrument requirement that this amendment seeks to maintain. We know that the government have argued, and the Minister has again said this today, that they fear Ofwat's flexibility could be in some way impeded or to adapt their rules as necessary. But statutory instruments, Madam Deputy Speaker, still remain a timely measure to introduce any necessary changes if they are needed to make them. So once again, I say that that argument doesn't really stack up from the government. It is also only right that we as a House, as parliamentarians elected by the British public to represent their interests with our voices and our votes, be able to look at what is proposed and exercise our ability to voice concerns if any proposed rules risk falling short of what protects the public's interests. Why deny the public and members of this House the ability to uphold that accountability when we know that that is what has been missing for too long where the water industry is concerned? As such, we have once again urged the government to accept what we believe is a reasonable set of amendments in the name of accountability. I now see that at the 11th hour, the government tabled Government Amendment A to Lord's Reason 2A, insisting on Commons Amendment 2 being removed. The amendments tabled and argued for by my Conservative friends in the other place, the noble Lords Roborough and Lord Blencathra, and then adding a clause that the rules about remuneration and governance may not be enacted until the rules have been provided in draft to the Secretary of State. So there's a move towards some accountability for the government, but sadly not as much as we on this side of the House had wanted, which was a statutory instrument laid by the Secretary of State and then approved by both houses. Nonetheless, I'm grateful that the government has listened to Lord Roborough, me, and Conservative colleagues who have argued for more accountability, and that the government have moved a little bit of the way towards us with this amendment. But I'm still unclear why the government appears scared of full accountability on this. Sadly, I fear that some of these last-minute concessions that we would like to see go further look just like the government trying to avoid double insistence and the bill failing. We do not wish the bill to fail, as we all want the same thing: to see our waters improve and for the government to continue with the measures that we Conservatives set in train in the last Parliament. In that spirit, we will not stand in the way of the government amendments today. Madam Deputy Speaker, there has been many a chance for the government to grab opportunities to bolster this bill with both hands. Many chances have been missed throughout the passage of this bill, not least in the government continually rejecting to establish our Water Restoration Fund, to ring-fence fines to restore local waterways and not to be used to balance the Treasury's books. They didn't accept our sensible Conservative proposals to go further with nature-based solutions to flood risk. They rejected our proposals for fines on water companies to result in equivalent reductions in customers' bills. And they rejected our sensible proposals to put rules on borrowing, where the Secretary of State can place limits on the amount water companies can borrow, and they blocked our Conservative proposals to protect consumers in different parts of the country paying for failing water companies that do not supply them. As this bill now progresses, and as we now enter the government's Cunliffe review, I again urge the government, for the sake of our water, our environment, our constituents, our communities, and indeed fairness, please do not let political pride and dogma stand in the way of doing the right thing and making water legislation the best it can be. Madam Deputy Speaker, we wish this bill well as it now ends its journey in this House.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Tim Farron.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to be back talking about the water bill again. We Liberal Democrats and in committee and on the floor of this House report stage, I think, put down a grand total of, I think, 56 amendments. So what's two more? But we also, as the Honourable Member for Epping Forest has said, that believe this bill to be a good thing and wish to see it on the statute book. We don't feel it goes far enough, and we have the opportunity, just looking at the two amendments before us today, to consider that a little more. When it comes to the first amendment we are considering today, Madam Deputy Speaker, so the government wants to introduce financial reporting requirements for water companies. The report should be a concise, intelligible and up-to-date overview of the financial position of each undertaker, namely a water company, including information on share capital and debt, including any significant changes that may have happened in the last 12 months or expected changes in the 12 months to come, and they to be required once a year. We very much welcome this amendment. We tabled many like it, or retain aspects of these proposals both at committee stage and at report stage. We are bound to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we feel they were better amendments, more ambitious and more far-reaching. But as with much of this water bill, it is a decent start, and so we don't want to stand in the way. But just to clarify, we did propose a variety of amendments to this bill up to this point. For example, calling for Ofwat to be made responsible for ensuring financial stability and financial stability duty upon water companies. We call for the banning of bonuses for water company bosses whose companies were performing poorly, and are not just on environmental duties but with regard to financial stability and water quality also. And then, of course, in this place we move to a vote with the permission of the Chair on a ban on water companies making customers pay for the debt that they had at the point of bankruptcy, and instead that matter should be paid for, those debts should be paid for by investors who've taken risks, and that's right. And we're disappointed the government objected, voted against us on that, and indeed the Conservative Party sat on their hands and wouldn't support bill payers in that instance. This is really important, and it's live. In my communities in the northwest of England, in Westmorland, 11% of bill payers' bills are being paid just to service the debt of United Utilities, and yet in other parts of the country, like Thames Water, for example, that is around 35% and potentially even more. We've also called not just for scrutiny of the water companies when it comes to their finances, but also other areas as well. And this is an area in which this bill has absolutely moved things in the right direction, but not radically enough. We have, for instance, sought to encourage and persuade, without success, the committee and both Labour and Conservative front benches, that it'd be wise to have environmental experts on the boards of water companies, and that the very laudable and very positive move the government's making towards a live database that citizen scientists can scrutinise. We asked, again at the committee stage, that should be a historic database, searchable in retrospect, not just live. Because if I think about wonderful organisations in my constituency, replicated around the country, of course, as well, but the Eden Rivers Trust, the South Lakes Rivers Trust, the Clean River Kent campaign, Save Windermere, organisations like that who, within their free time would be monitoring this database to see where lakes are. Unless they're able to look at it 24/7 and do nothing else in their lives, some things may well get past them. So, for example, between 21 and 23, there were 120 million litres of sewage pumped into Windermere Lake without United Utilities reporting it. We are reliant upon citizen scientists knowing about this stuff, and having a great database is only really going to do the job if it's searchable in retrospect as well. So scrutiny and transparency is vital on the finances, but also when it comes to environmental matters too. But on that, the first of the amendments we're looking at today, we are satisfied the government amendment does provide increased transparency on water company finance, and therefore we won't be making a nuisance of ourselves on that particular issue on this particular occasion. Moving to the second of the amendments in front of us, the Honourable Member for Epping Forest rightly highlights and reminds people of my distaste for not having stuff on the face of the bill, and our statutory instruments are not the best way of doing things. Despite that fact, I'm even more of a fan of making sure there's proper scrutiny scrutiny in this place of those who are meant to be scrutinising our water companies, namely those at Ofwat. So, oddly enough, throughout the process of this bill so far, Liberal Democrats have made proposals, good, radical, environmentally minded proposals in the interest of our constituents and our waterways. The government have understandably stuck to their guns and voted against us, but the official opposition has abstained on pretty much absolutely everything, including, it would appear, on their own amendment today, when we actually want to vote for it. Because we take the view, for all of my reticence and our reticence of not having important matters on the face of the bill, we also think that this is an issue where an amendment which proposed in the other place by my, just like my honourable former neighbour here for Epping Forest today, but Lord Blencathra, my right honourable neighbour but one in the past, for former Penrith of the Border, and a very, very accomplished parliamentarian. What he's seeking to do, this amendment will require increased parliamentary scrutiny of Ofwat when signing off water company bonuses. And that is a huge concern to me, and I think to most people around this country, and definitely in my constituency. We have, for example, a situation with record bonuses being paid around the country to senior executives, when there's not a single stretch. Go on, yeah, of course.
I thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you for giving way. Would the honourable member agree with me that indeed he put forward a veritable smorgasbord of amendments to the Bill Committee, and all of these issues were discussed at that point? But it's so important that Ofwat must retain its independence, and it's extremely I think relevant for me to point out that during the years of coalition and in the 14 years of the other side being in government, no bills were passed to ban water company bonuses, and this bill will do just that.
Well, on that particular matter, she's right. Previous governments have not tackled these issues the way they should have done, of all parties, including, the Labour government that I spent significant previous Labour government underneath Gordon Brown and Tony Blair. There's no doubt whatsoever, however, that what we're looking at now is a massively changed situation. So, why does the public care so much about this issue than was the case 5 or 6 years ago? And I say this neutrally because we were in the European Union, and before then we had different levels of scrutiny, and also because this House went through the process of basically lifting the bonnet to see what was already acceptable. That at that point, people in this place and around the country became utterly outraged at what was permissible. So yeah, parties of all sides take a responsibility, but not least the party that privatised the industry in the first place and let the cat out of the bag in this respect. But Ofwat need to be scrutinised themselves. That's the thing that I find most frustrating. And us being not in the European Union now means that our own regulations are not scrutinised from outside. So if we don't do it, who is going to? And we've heard many times of Ofwat's failure to properly scrutinise and hold to account the water companies. We heard on more than one occasion in committee and in this place as well of the £164 million worth of fines Ofwat have levied against 3 water companies that 4 years on, of which they have collected precisely £0 and 0 pence. So our argument throughout this process is that Ofwat, containing many very good and valuable people working their hardest, is nevertheless a regulator not fit for purpose. And the consequences of this amendment would be to allow there to be to force the Ofwat to give a 6-month notice of bonuses that they had signed off, rather than the 7 days that the government now wants to do. That is inadequate. And I will happily give way.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving way. I'm slightly curious at the 11th hour why the third party now is changing their position. In the other place, when this amendment was taken to a vote, the Liberal Democrats abstained on 2 occasions. So now they're playing political games and actually risking the progress of this bill. The amendment, as it stated, was to have a statutory instrument to increase parliamentary scrutiny and accountability. The government has moved some way, not as far as we would like, but the third party are now playing political games and risk the progress of a bill trying to improve the state of our waters.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. I can do maths. in which case I know there's absolutely no threat whatsoever to the progress of this bill, because I know what the numbers will be roughly when and if we divide on this matter. But that doesn't. I am not a late convert. I'm an early convert long before him to the importance of scrutiny. And so it's important for us to make the case that, imperfect though this is, it is far better for this House to be given 6 months of notice of Ofwat's intention to allow bonuses than 7 days. Surely that is better. That is why we insist as we do. So this is Parliament scrutinising Ofwat because of Ofwat's failure to scrutinise the water companies. And that is the simple point here, and it is why we have proposed much more radical reform throughout the whole of this process, including abolishing Ofwat altogether. It's not the fault of the people who work for the organisation specifically, but when you think about regulation of the water industry, which is fragmented across parts of the EA, Ofwat and other agencies as well, without the powers that they require, without the resources that they need, of course the water companies run rings around them, and it is our constituents and our waterways, our lakes, our rivers and our coastal areas that bear the brunt and suffer. And so we... go on, yes.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member for giving way again. And he stands up and he talks about the number of fantastic amendments that the third party made at committee stage, many of which were so poorly worded that they weren't actually worth voting on. But his particular amendment about abolishing Ofwat actually had no suggestion about what they would replace it with, how much it would cost. It didn't. In the clauses of the bill, how much it would cost, how long it would take. So when we're wanting Ofwat to have the teeth to actually hold water companies to account, they were proposing getting rid of it. But again, as the party of protest, not offering any credible solutions.
Yes, well, first of all, if he'd paid more attention, he would know that we propose a Clean Water Authority, which would gather up all the powers of Ofwat and the environmental regulatory powers, water regulatory powers of the Environment Agency. And again, there is a little bit of a pattern, and I say this gently, both in opposition and in government. The Conservative Party shows greater levels of fury and anger about Liberal Democrats campaigning to clean up our waterways than they do about the fact that our waterways are full of poop in the first place. And so I will finish, and no, I've done two, so that will do. And I will finish this. And my simple comment is this, that this is a bill which will do good, and we're supportive of it, and we only wish to trouble the House a short time to make sure greater scrutiny is brought in. We've accepted throughout the whole of this process, with some reluctance, the Minister and the Government as a whole's position that this is part one, and that part two is to come, and the review led by Sir John Cunliffe is going to consider potentially more radical action. We hope that's the case, and on that basis, that's how we shall engage with things. So I have, Madam Deputy Speaker, in my hand some pieces of paper which I propose to send to Sir John Cunliffe, tightening up on some of the, as has been said, smorgasbord of amendments, because we care deeply about our waterways. For the Member of Parliament, I am honoured to be representing the bulk of the English Lake District, so many lakes and so many rivers, and our coastal areas and Morecambe Bay as well. The quality of our waterways is deeply personal to me and to our communities, and so we shall continue unashamedly to campaign for something far better for our constituents and indeed for our water right across the United Kingdom.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And with the leave of the House, I'd like to thank all honourable members for their thoughtful and valuable contributions to the debate today. And without sort of daring to step into the territory of a second reading debate, I would gently suggest to the House that the reason that we are here today with the Water Special Measures Bill was precisely because of the public outrage caused by the lack of investment and the fact that every single river, lake and sea in our country has been polluted. And so as stated by the official opposition, had they done the marvellous, wonderful job at which they seem to be wanting to tell me that they have, there wouldn't be the need for the bill in the first place, and nor would there be need for all the campaigns that have happened up and down the country. But on that, I will regret, not go further. And on the Water Restoration Fund, I generally say, because I have respect for the honourable gentleman, and he does know that, it is dishonest to suggest that legislation is needed for the Water Restoration Fund, because in fact they created the Water Restoration Fund without legislation, and so to imply that legislation is required to have it would be inadvertently dishonest thing to be suggesting, because it was created without legislation, therefore it does not need legislation to be held. So I would like to say that. I will, of course.
slightly concerned that the Minister's raising questions about my honesty. Well, thank you. But the Water Restoration Fund exists, but where is it now? What has happened to it? Is the government going to use it again? That is why we wanted to push at every single stage of this bill that this Water Restoration Fund needs to be used to ring-fence money so that fines put on water companies actually can be ploughed back into restoring local waterways. So I'm very happy if the Minister says today that the Water Restoration Fund is carrying on, and then my honesty will be intact.
I thank the honourable gentleman, and as I've always said throughout, he will have to wait and see, but to imply that legislation is required for this fund would be dishonest, and I'm sure the honourable gentleman does not want his honesty to be questioned, and therefore the implication that legislation is required for water restoration fund is simply not true. As I outlined in my opening speech, I recognise that there remains a strong interest in the wider issues and those within the scope of our debate today. And I would like to reiterate that this bill is not the limit of our ambition, as has been mentioned, and the Government will continue to work with honourable members across the House to discuss and make progress in addressing the fundamental issues facing our water sector. The honourable gentleman mentions time to time. The wording has been specifically allowed to allow Ofwat to review requirements as and when appropriate and adapt quickly where needed. We do not want to preempt how often this kind of review might need to take place. And just to reassure him, this has been discussed at length in the other place. And on the parliamentary scrutiny, the Government did work with Ofwat to offer peers and MPs an opportunity to raise questions on Ofwat's rules for a parliamentary drop-in session, providing further insight of the rules. However, this proposal was not accepted by the honourable members' colleagues in the other place, which feels like a shame. It has always been our intention to bring about meaningful change in the performance and culture of the water sector through this bill, and the amendments tabled by the Government are in keeping with this objective. I hope this House will support the Government amendments which will ensure that the public can easily access an overview of water company financial information and will require the Ofwat's duty to issue rules in relation to financial transparency that will commence upon royal assent. Together, these amendments will enable Government to take another positive step forward in restoring the public trust in the water sector. Sadly, public trust which has been destroyed over the last 14 years. Similarly, I hope the House will support the Government in bringing forward amendments to ensure Ofwat's rules are brought forward promptly and that Ofwat's independence is protected. While the Government acknowledges the intention behind the changes made in the other place, we cannot accept the risk that it creates in delaying the introduction of Ofwat's rules. I therefore hope that members across the House will also support the Government in ensuring that these vital rules are brought forward without delay.
I'm sure that the Minister did not mean to imply that the Shadow Minister was in any way dishonest, and she might perhaps seek to correct the record to say she felt he was mistaken or incorrect.
Very happy to issue that correction.
Thank you. The question is that this House insists on Commons Amendment 1, disagrees to Lords Amendment 1B, and proposes Amendments A and B in lieu of the words left out by Commons Amendment 1. As many as of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no.
No. Aye. Aye.
Division. Clear the lobby. Okay. The question is that this House insists on Commons Amendment 1, disagrees to Lords Amendment 1B and proposes Amendments A and B in lieu of the words left out by Commons Amendment 1. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Division off.
Division off. Division off.
So just saying, I think the ayes have it.
I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Here, here.
Well, we could.
You might want to give it a moment just for
So
everyone to get
there's
there.
some of them back in here for the division. And how long do I have to leave this?
I mean, it's for your judgment. I pre-give them to these in.